If you're in a normal labor scenario, water is super, super good for pain. But what ended up happening with me is that the water calmed me down so much that my contractions stopped. Like they just stopped. They just slowly tapered off, and it wasn't working anymore. So what we did at this point is the nurse said, maybe we should turn off the Pitocin and see what happens if we just give your body a break, wean off the Pitocin, take a little nap, relax, like regather yourself, and then what we'll do is once we turn the Pitocin back on in like half an hour, we're gonna bust it all the way to like 18 units instead of starting again at 2. We're gonna start at 18 and hopefully it'll shock your body into starting having contractions again. So we did that, and by 1 o'clock my Pitocin was back up to 16, and then by 2 o'clock my contractions were getting really, really strong, and they were 2 minutes apart, but at 2:45 I was still 2 centimeters dilated. And like, I remember this feeling, like I still get emotional and like teary-eyed thinking about it. Like, I had been doing all this work and I had already been in labor for like almost 24 hours and I wasn't progressing. So they tried again to break up the scar tissue, and by 4:30 my contractions were really intense. So my fiance was like helping me with like counter pressure and like hip pressure, and we were doing all these different positions, and he was helping me balance on the ball, and we were like dancing and just doing everything we could to try to ease the pain. And then by 5 o'clock, still 2 centimeters dilated. But what they said is like, when they check you, they like put their fingers inside, and when I was having a contraction I would open to 2.5, so it was like some kind of progress. And then at 6 o'clock I got back in the bathtub because at this point the contractions were still really intense and the water really helped me. So I took the risk of getting back in the bathtub and cooling off and trying to help with the pain. So then we had another nurse change, and then the doctor who had originally told me about the C-section came back in, and he's like, look, we need to do something about this situation. You can't be in labor this long without having some kind of intervention. I know you already started the Pitocin, but we need to up the game, or you're going to end up in a C-section today at 2 o'clock. I think he said if you haven't progressed at 2 o'clock, you're going to go back to C-section. So, I started crying, and I'm like, I don't want that. So he said that if I agreed to getting an epidural, that he would not do the C-section right away. So what he said was that I was tensing up so much during the contractions that I wasn't allowing my body to fully dilate, which I don't agree with. I still think it was the leak that was holding me back. But he said if you get the epidural, hopefully you can get some rest and your body can recoup from all the Pitocin and you can start to dilate. So by 10 o'clock, this is Tuesday morning, by 10 o'clock I was getting the epidural. I was like crying. I was just so against any kind of interventions, especially an epidural. So from that point on, I was bedridden, which is the last thing I wanted. Like, I had researched all these birth positions and done like all this like Kinsey testing and all this stuff, and I couldn't do anything. And the epidural felt awful. It didn't work. It kept shifting to one side of my body or the other, and it just felt like pins and needles. It was awful. Like, I regret it so much. But it did work in helping me dilate. So at this point, I just kind of hung out throughout the day waiting to dilate. And then by 4:45, I was 100 centimeters dilated and I was 100 centimeters effaced and 4 centimeters dilated. So I just was waiting, and then by 9:30, I was 7 centimeters, and my Pitocin was up to 24 units. So by 12:30, so this was Wednesday morning, I had finally reached 10 centimeters dilated. However, when I started trying to push at this point just to see what would happen, and what ended up happening is, so the cervix looks like a little donut, and I had like this little lip still in front of the cervix, and they said that that would be really dangerous for the baby to like pass through. So what they did was they said, okay, you're 10 centimeters dilated, but you have this lip, so we're going to go ahead and give you another bolus of the epidural and give you a break and let you take a nap and see if you can get like recharged so that when you come back, it's time to push. So that was at 3:20 when I got the next bolus. and I started pushing at 5 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. And I just remember throughout the pushing process, like the epidural like was pretty much gone by that point because it never really worked to begin with. So I just remember like having really, really, really intense back labor. And I couldn't figure out why I was having such intense back labor because that wasn't the case like the days before. So I just remember pushing and pushing and pushing and like nothing was happening. And I'm like, why can't I do this? Like it was so frustrating. And my mother-in-law was there, and my fiance, and my doula, and my sister, and my stepdaughter. And I remember my stepdaughter was doing like the counting for the pushing, like the 1 through 10. And I just remember like I couldn't focus on her counting because after a while of pushing, like all I could hear was the heart monitor, and every contraction, like his heartbeat would drop so low, like into the 60s, they said. So at this point, the nurse is starting to become like concerned on why he's not coming out, why his heart rate is dropping during the contractions so drastically. So by, I want to say it was 7 o'clock, no, by 7:30, the doctor came in and he's like, what's going on? How come baby's not coming? So he went in and did a check, and he's like, so the doctor said, baby is sunny side up and he can't get under the pubic bone, because normally what happens is baby kind of does like this roll, and they roll, they're like face down and they roll underneath the pubic bone, and then as they come out they like face upwards, I guess. But what was happening is that he was face up. So baby was face up and he couldn't get under my pubic bone. And actually, like, still to this day, he has like a little scar on his head from where he was like rocking back and forth face up, like rubbing against my pubic bone, which is like really hard for me to see, but it's finally starting to go away. Like I put breast milk and stuff on it. But at that point, they just said, C-section is kind of your only option at this point. I wouldn't advise you to consider pushing more because his heart rate is dropping during the contractions. And I just felt like so defeated. Like I feel traumatized by this moment. Like I get so emotional thinking about it, because I remember I started crying because I didn't want to, I didn't want that to happen. I had envisioned like this perfect birth, and I was going to like pull my baby out and put him on my chest and breastfeed him right away and do all these things with him. And I just remember like looking up, and like my stepdaughter was crying, and like my sister was crying, and my fiance looked so concerned, and it was so hard, like so hard. But I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and do the C-section. So I was wheeled into emergency C-section, and he was born at 8 o'clock, 8:06 in the morning. The C-section itself was really difficult because throughout the night, I thought I was going to have like a normal vaginal labor. So I ate a lot of ice chips, which, I hadn't eaten in like a day and a half. So I ate a lot of ice chips, but what ended up happening during the surgery with all the anesthesia was that the ice chips, that was the only thing I had in my stomach. So during the C-section, I started throwing up really bad. So I just remember like, laying down, there's like the cover in front of you, and I could see like my fiance looking over, and he just looked so scared. He's never seen something like that before. His 3 other kids were born, vaginally. So he just looked so concerned, and when they finally pulled him out, is when I started throwing up. So I just remember like being like thrown over, the side, because they have your arms, and they let me take my arms out, and I was like throwing up into like a little basin, and then I could see like him with like this tiny little bundle, and I was just like crying and throwing up, and but I could hear Sammy, I could hear him crying, and I just felt so much better. And I remember he came and like brought him up to my face, and I was able to see him for the first time. And you never forget that moment where you see your baby for the first time. And then it just was really hard because after I had gotten like Zoloft and all this stuff to like help with the nausea because of the throwing up, not to mention like all the medication that I had taken to fully numb me for the surgery because they weren't working. When I got out, like he had to leave before me because I ended up bleeding too much, so they had to deal with that. And then when I finally got to back to the delivery room to kind of do like recovery, I remember I couldn't stay awake. Like I couldn't keep my eyes open. It was awful. Like I have pictures where like none of the pictures are of me with my eyes open after he was born. So there are even pictures where like my sister's like trying to like latch him on like to my breast for me because I couldn't do anything. I could barely move. I couldn't keep my arms up. So it was like dangerous for me to hold him afterwards by myself. So that lasted the whole rest of the day. Like, and I delivered at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I probably was back in my room by like 9:30. And that was the whole day. So that whole June 21st on his birthday, I don't remember much, but there are pictures. So I'll try to insert some here so you guys can see those pictures. That's it. That's how this little guy came into the world. It was a journey getting pregnant. It took me, about 10 years to get pregnant from when I found out that I probably could never get pregnant. This little guy is a miracle. I had like a less than 5% chance of ever getting pregnant. So even though our birth story is nothing what I intended it to be or what I thought it would be, it's ours, and I love that he's here, and I would do it all over again to have this beautiful little boy. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you guys for all of your support on my channel. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Please like this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks. Bye.